Hello, everybody. Jeff Mason and Paul Baum, SimpleBiz360 podcast. So excited to have Paul on today. And before we start, Paul, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, if you could, man?
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you for having me on the show. Paul Baum from Boca Raton, Florida, father of two, very proud father of two girls, and a marriage of 27 years. Couldn't be happier. Coming from Boca Raton, Florida, and Planet ROI and the Digital Dreams Project.
Awesome. Well, we're gonna have a lot of fun today, fleshing some stuff out, folks. We really appreciate you tuning in today. And if you want to subscribe, if you like the show, you're on YouTube. Lower right hand corner, you'll see a pinwheel favicon. Hover over it, boom, takes you to YouTube. You got to be signed in, and you can subscribe there. We're on 27 listening platforms. Paul, any of your friends, family, customers want to catch us, we're on all the audio platforms as well. And we're just really privileged today, and I do mean that sincerely, to have Paul with us, and very exciting story. So before we start, Half Coast Studios, we got Dietz and Matt here helping Paul behind the glass, working the sound, coming to you from St. Louis on our end. And our story started, Paul and I, in Secaucus, New Jersey, but actually it was in Ithaca, New York, I think is where it really started. But I want to tell you how we connected. So, you know, God bless social media, right? So here's what happened to me on February 18th at 8:06 a.m. I get an email from Paul Baum, and it says thank you on it. And it's Thank You Thursday. And Paul writes me an email, and in the email, he said, and I just want to read you one sentence: I wanted to take time out on my Thank You Thursday to recognize your leadership and your sales training I received back in 1990 as a newly graduated 21-year-old. Stuck with me. So, you know, I just want to say this, one of those little pleasures in life when you open up your email and you get something like this 30 years later, and, you know, it just, it really touches the heart. So, yes, Paul and I met in 1990. He was a senior at Ithaca College. We recruited Paul, we interviewed students at Ithaca, and Paul joined our company, was in the computer world. I'll let him tell you a little bit about things, but we hired Paul in 1990, and known him, you know, worked with him for a year and known him since then. And so here we are, and Paul, this is your story. I'm so excited to be a part of telling it. And man, where did you grow up? Was it in New Jersey or was it in New York?
No, I grew up in Potomac, Maryland, right outside of Washington, D.C. And, you know, parents were involved with the federal government. Mom was a real estate agent, selling homes to all the people working for the federal government. And I ended up at Ithaca because I played basketball, and that's where I could play. That's
Wow.
how I ended up there.
Okay. So great little Division III school, big, yeah, very successful wrestling program, soccer program up there as well. So very cool. Now, was your family, aside from your mom working in that realm, were there any entrepreneurs that kind of inspired you along the way to kind of germinate this whole idea?
Yeah, so the real story, Jeff, is I was fired from my first three jobs. And my father sat me down after getting fired from my third job and said, son, maybe it's time to be an entrepreneur like your grandfather. So my grandfather was an entrepreneur. He came over from the old country, from Europe, and started a grocery. Well, he was a baggage boy, worked his way up to the manager, and then by the time he was 21, owned a grocery store, and then brought over all of our relatives, and you know, quite honestly, had a very successful career owning grocery stores with our family. I didn't grow up in the business because my father, you know, ended up taking a job as a, you know, federal employee. But I'm sure there's entrepreneurship in the bloodstream. But being fired from your first three jobs, I got fired from CSR after you left from the next manager. And then when I went to IBM, I got fired from them. And that's when I made the decision with my dad I should be an entrepreneur, and started my first business, and was very successful at growing that for 10 years, sold it. And then this is our 20th year at Planet ROI. So in a 30-year span, I've owned two businesses, and, you know, I'm very proud to say both have had a huge impact on many people's lives.
Yeah, well, and we're going to get into that because you are 110% right. You really are. So, where I met Paul, where we ended up connecting, hired Paul as an entry-level sales person for a company that was back in the 90s. We had computer depot repair. So basically, back then, computers weren't disposable. You would send in a power supply, a keyboard, a hard drive, a floppy drive, a monitor, and you would get them fixed, system board, and you would actually pay a lesser fee with a third-party company like we had, and you would get a longer warranty. And then we would send the part back to the computer store, basically, and they would, or the university, wherever it was, and then they would put it back in the computer and get it going. So, Paul, you were in that business from day one, and you've basically stayed on track with that type of product. Is that correct?
I did. Today we still are in the computer business. Obviously, that's morphed quite a bit. But it was the training. I actually want to take this time to let the listeners know a little bit about Jeff Mason. So my first day on the job after, so Jeff, you and your team kind of put us fellows that were coming from multiple areas around the country and gave us an opportunity to meet each other prior to our training. And we all kind of lived with each other because none of us were from the area. You guys were great recruiters in that respect. So I lived with 3 other guys in a very small apartment in Secaucus, New Jersey. And I remember us going to the first day of work, and the first words out of your mouth were, look right, look left, look behind you, look in front of you. In 1 week, half of you guys won't make it through this training class. And that stuck with me because my roommates and I all relied on each other because we basically were pretty poor.
Right.
Relied on each other to make sure we could pay rent. So we studied, the Jeff Mason way. I have no idea what kind of training I was getting, except for it was coming from the Jeff Mason book of sales. And that really, really stuck with me. Now, come fast forward 30 years later, my oldest daughter is graduating from University of Arizona. She wants to be in social media. I told her and her boyfriend, the best thing you could do is go to work for a company that's going to give you really great sales training, because that's applicable to life. Doesn't matter what you end up doing afterwards. And started actually thinking about you, talking about you to my kids, right? And I have a reminder on my calendar for the last 20 years of my life that on Thursdays I just thank somebody, right? So hence I reached out to you for Thank You Thursday, because I was thinking about you. But coming full circle again, what's really important is the principles that you taught me, not the lesson of, by the way, one of our roommates didn't make it. My rent went up. So, that debt structure made me work a lot harder.
Oh my gosh. It's actually sounds, listening to it now, 30 years later, sounds a little over dramatic, Paul, on my part, but,
you were very dramatic, Jeff. We loved you and feared you all in one.
Oh my gosh. That's too funny. Well, I appreciate you sharing that with me. And folks, just to kind of give you an idea. Yeah, we did have a pretty cool recruiting program in that, we really wanted to let the people like yourself know that we had an interest in you. We had an interest in building your skill sets. And I think if you remember, Paul, even back then, I used to tell everybody, look, very few of us, if any, are ever going to be at this company for more than a couple years, or certainly not going to be here forever. But let's take away transferable skills that we can take and use in other places. And that is really the art of the deal, in that environment. So it was a 2-week in-house sales training environment. We really dug in on the sales componentry and just tried to give you guys some skills like I had been exposed to early on that, could travel with you for the rest of your career. So I'm just intrigued. Are some of those skills still traveling with you today?
100%. I mean, I can think of three things right now. One was, my dialing style, right? So back then, you had cards, you had to, dial off of cards. It was like a Wall Street firm. It wasn't like selling computer parts, and you were given a territory. So you had to do research, find businesses in your territory. There was so much turnover at CSR that we would get a lot of flack. Hey, the last guy didn't follow up or follow through. And then it was the note taking and the role playing.
Yeah.
So the most that I took away from you, Jeff, was the role playing. I'd never, made cold calls before or was ever out in the field. I never got out in the field with you, but I appreciated the opportunity to learn that. Those skills are transferable to today.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, great, very cool to hear that, Paul, and I'm excited about that. Well, listen, thanks for saying yes when you got the job offer. You were certainly a great hire, and it's fun to see people like yourself evolve. And I don't take credit for anything. You've got a lot of great stuff in your life story to tell. So let's start telling it a little bit. So when you were with the company, you left the entry-level company that I hired you into, and then you went to IBM, and then from there you started your own company, and you were with that for 10 years. And that, if I'm not mistaken, was also in computer componentry. It was either you were buying it and refurbishing it or not.
Actually, the first opportunity I had was when I was working with IBM. They my last real boss, right, got a project when Manufacturers Hanover Bank and Chemical Bank merged that I forgot which bank had NCR equipment and we had the IBM equipment. The goal was, how do we displace the NCR equipment, get IBM equipment in there? And my role was to do the research to figure out how to do that. So I did so, came back to my boss with, back then it was a flip chart. There was no, PowerPoint yet. I took him through the flip chart and he said, this is great. Let's take it to the marketing team. We did, we gave them the presentation. I gave him the presentation. Unfortunately, he did not do a great job of presenting it. They had many, many questions. Back then at IBM, if you were a junior person like I was right out of college, you sat behind your boss. You didn't have a seat at the table, so to speak. I know that sounds just completely bizarre. Wow. And I helped out while he was giving the presentation, thought I was doing a great thing. He rode me over to the next conference room right after that and fired me. So I was literally fired and inspired all at once.
Yeah.
I got 3 weeks later, I got a phone call back from the marketing and sales folks at IBM that we were pitching to. Said, look, we want to go execute this. Can you help us? They hired me as a consultant. I started Rumerson Technologies, which is RTI, my first business. And we did the first ever transaction for their cash in and trade up businesses, which is, by the way, today over $1 billion division for them, their ARS division.
Wow.
And that was literally the first transaction. They outsourced it to me, and I got started.
Wow, that is, I remember walking through the doors there to see, somebody said, hey, you got to go see Paul in his new place. And I'll just I never forget that. I walked through like a big set of double French doors, if I remember.
It was in Hoboken, New Jersey.
Yeah. So that's no, listen, that's great. Well, folks, and I'm going to let Paul tell a little bit about it later on in the podcast, but PlanITROI.com. Now it's PLANIT ROI.com. That's Paul's company. And going to let you just explain, how did you come to birth this company 21 years ago, you said, Paul?
Yeah, so this is our 20th anniversary. After selling my first business, which is my only business mistake, I mean, I look at every mistake as an opportunity. But my first business just, I was a young man. I wish I could talk to that young Paul Baum now as a senior guy in a business. But Planet ROI was birthed out of the ex-employees of my first company. They brought me on as a consultant to help them get it started. And then, we morphed into our first 10 years, really focused on helping the war effort with Panasonic and their tough books. So when we were at war between 2002 and 2011, a vast majority of the Department of Defense field soldiers, whether it was Army, Air Force, Marines, what have you, they used Panasonic tough books. Well, when they broke or they returned them, they came back through our facilities. So we repurposed them, refurbished them, and that was the first 10 years of Planet ROI. But when that contract was over, I needed to rebirth, redo, Planet ROI.
Right.
And at that time, the internet for drop ship, direct to consumer through mass merchants like Tiger Direct, eBay, and some of the other smaller retailers that are now enormous, like Best Buy.
Sure.
We really started to get into that, and built a huge market. Last year, we did a little under 700,000 units direct to consumer through many major brand mass merchants.
Wow. So the format still, I guess the epicenter of Planet ROI is you take retired assets or broken product or unworking product and you give it life again, you refurbish it, you repurpose it, and then what you say, your tagline is closing the digital divide with affordable technology. Flesh that out a little bit for us. What does this all mean?
Yeah, so our supply comes from Fortune 500 companies and the like. So organizations that typically have 20,000 knowledge workers or more. And when they upgrade their technology, where does the old stuff go, right? They need services like data destruction to make sure that the hard drives are wiped clean. They need services like logistics to pull it out of the field. I mean, everybody's working from home right now, so that even makes it more challenging. And they need services for either reallocation of those products for resale, or if they're defective and they can't be repaired or they're too old, recycling. So our company manages those types of services for global companies like Procter & Gamble, GlaxoSmithKline, Koch Industries, Acer, which is the largest supplier of new Chromebooks to students, and many other large organizations. And the idea behind that was, how do we get to the next user and get the highest recovery? We really discovered in the last 7 years that a lot of our product was going to students, low-income students that needed our technology in order to actually get their schoolwork done, get their homework done. And the birth of Tech Tuesdays, which is our 501c3 helping kids to get their homework done, was born out of that. So when we look at the processing of an old asset that you feel is worth nothing, it's someone else's everything.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, great way to put it.
That couldn't have been more prevalent than this past year when COVID-19 hit, the pandemic hit. These low-income kids didn't have a device to learn from.
Yeah.
And our role is to get low-income kids devices to learn from.
Well, I mean, great way to bottle it up. What was unimportant to somebody is important to the next person, and you're bridging that gap, if you will, which is a very noble cause. And I sense, Paul, from just reading through your website and researching a little bit about your company, you seem to really put people at the forefront of your company. And one of the things you really broadcast is that, there's a people first focus at Planet ROI. And by the way, your people are, the company's basically in Danville, New Jersey, if I have this correctly, and you're in Boca Raton, correct?
Yes. So we're actually all across the world. So one of our center of excellence is based out of Denville, New Jersey.
Okay.
That's where we process a significant part of our business, but we operate in 87 countries. I mean, we're a global organization. This year we'll do over $100 million. And back to the people first. So at the end of the day, we execute better when you think of your people first.
Yeah.
So what do I mean by that? So at the end of the day, if we're spending the time to train, teach, listen, learn from our people, we as an organization will execute better for our clients and our customers, therefore increasing and growing our business.
Yeah.
Over the last 5 years, we've grown pretty much every year and profitably. And that is due because we have a lot of moving parts. That's not due to a system or one individual. That's due to all the people in our organization.
Yeah, that's terrific. 87 countries. Well, I'm glad you touched on that because we're actually in about 12 or 13 countries now, and we actually have a bigger European audience than we do an American audience on the podcast. So there's a lot of people in Sweden, Ukraine. There's a lot of people in Norway, in Greenland, Estonia, that the Netherlands that picked this up. So they can just go to PlanITROI.com and get in touch with you, correct? Okay, great. So having fun at work. Man, I read this and, listen, I can tell you, where you and I worked in your first job, it was a little bit of a pressure cooker for sure, And then I moved out here to St. Louis. I took an executive position out here. And boy, oh boy, for 3 years, I was with a company that just did not allow you to have fun. If you smiled, if you were caught smiling during the course of a day, something was wrong. And it was just horrible. It was really just a negative Nelly experience. So you like to have fun. So explain that. What do you mean by that?
Yes. So I think the best example is if you can't laugh at yourself, you can't laugh at all. So I became a huge Tony Robbins fan, and he said, "Who are you?" And I said, I'm a gladiator. So, I love the movie Gladiator. And I had one of our interns, put my face on the gladiator's body and put it in my office. And it's funny because, when I had an office, people would come into my office and they would see this picture of the gladiator and my face was on it. So it's just little things like that if you can't make fun of yourself. The other thing that I think is really, really important is, to let people know how you really feel. It doesn't mean that you don't hold back.
Right.
And I'm an emotional guy. I'm a passionate guy. So sometimes I can behave inappropriately. But what I like to say is that you don't hold back your emotions for the love of what you're doing, for the passion that you feel about what you want to do in life. You should always be working towards what you want to be doing. I ask every single one of my teammates that reports to me, not once a year at a review, but at our one-on-ones continuously, what kind of personal growth are you working on that's going to lead to your professional growth? So, if you're doing things that make work fun, it feels a lot less like work.
Oh, absolutely. And you can still, and you've proven to yourself and your employees that you can still be serious. You can still get the job done, create goals and objectives that are really meaningful, and yet have fun. And I think you're also touching on this balance that we've seen, especially in last year. We've got this. A lot of people got furloughed. A lot of people got sent back to their homes to work. You've now don't work in an office, traditional office environment. You work out of a satellite office, and And, we're seeing this marriage of work and life. There's a balance, there's a merging, there's a convergence and you've got to be able to blend these two things today. And I think you're probably one of these CEOs that realizes correct me if I'm wrong, don't you get a more productive employee when you set that tone?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, look, 100%. If you were balanced, you're going to be productive, but balance is all relative. I mean, what I think is balance could be completely different
Correct.
for Jeff Mason, which could be completely different for, Joe Schmo.
Yeah.
So what I've done with my team, right, is, given them the opportunity to set their goals for the week. We call it, our daily huddle, top 5 weekly. So, and those are based on objectives that we have for the organization, which we call a wildly important goal. So we follow 3 pillars in our organization. One is based on the principles of EOS, which is a book written by Gino Wickman called Traction. The next is a book written by Sean Covey and a bunch of other authors called 4DX, or 4 Disciplines of Execution. And then the third is David Freeman, who wrote a book called Culture by Design. Those are the 3 pillars of our organization. So as long as we can stay accountable, we can measure our success, we can have meaningful meetings that get to the issues, right? It's easier to have a structure like that. And then if people are thriving, right, which they usually do when they have some structure like that, if they're working from home, I've been working from home for 3 years, right? So if I need to take off and go do something for my family, I just put it out of office for 2 hours.
Sure.
I think the challenge right now, especially for COVID, working from home, is having the right work environment. So if you're in a city, it's very difficult because you're in a small apartment. If you're still living at home because you're a young adult, it's tough to work and live in the same house with your parents. I mean, there's challenges out there.
Sure.
We've been faced with them all year. But I think we were prepared because as the CEO of the company, I started to work remote 3 years ago.
Yeah. So you kind of realize some of the ins and outs of it. Sure. Yeah. I've been doing it for 14 years. Wouldn't change it for the world. I shouldn't say I rented an office for about 5 years. And once my kids didn't need my finished downstairs basement, I said, you know what? I'm going to scrap the monthly rent, and I'm going to go downstairs and oh gosh, it's so much nicer because it's
a great commute past the kitchen. You can always get a snack.
Yes, that's one of the problems too. But no, I got you. So I'm so glad you said this before. Here's Paul Baum, the CEO of a $100 million company, sitting behind an IBM guy. You can't get up to the table, and yet your company. You have instilled this notion and this concept of creativity and voices heard. How important is that to the DNA of Planet ROI?
Yeah, so the first, when I do almost, I think at this point, I've probably done 95% of the onboarding initiation into our organization. And I walk them through, number one, I start with that I was fired from my first 3 jobs. The second thing I start with is that I'm dyslexic. I stuttered as a kid. No one's perfect. Everybody makes mistakes. And if you try really hard, you're going to make mistakes.
Yeah.
I think at my organization, you're able to make mistakes. It's tough though, in this type of environment because there's not enough I would say water cooler talk. And I say think because again, the folks that are reporting to me are managing a lot of the day-to-day actions. But some of the, newer, teammates that I manage, I've watched them grow up kind of the same way you watched me grow up, right?
Yeah.
You're going to fumble and fall and skin your knee, my role is to guide them, let them fall, right?
Sure.
But not get too banged up.
Well, yeah. Well, I think you learn so much out of mistakes. I think you learn so much out of issues. And then, once you can adopt that as a lesson learned and just avoid that mistake the next time, that's a great area to be in. So very cool. So Tech Tuesday, what is, explain for the listeners and viewers a little bit more about Tech Tuesday, if you could.
Yeah. So a friend of mine convinced me in January of 2015 to go to my first ever Tony Robbins conference, and he wanted me to go to the UPW, which is, you get really pumped up. But I refused. I said, I'll go to the business conference. So in the first 30 minutes that I was there, you're supposed to give a 30-second pitch to the person on your left, and then the person on your right. The person on my right was a lady by the name of Julie. And I'll never forget this. I said, Planet ROI refurbishes, recertifies, and resells used computers and mobile phones and sells them direct to consumers through major retailers like Best Buy, Staples, Office Depot, Amazon, eBay, and Groupon. And she gets these huge eyes, and she's like, you don't know, you don't understand. You are changing people's lives. And I'm looking at her like, how are my used computers changing people's lives? And she's like, well, my brother and I, well, let me just start from the beginning. Obama did a great job getting technology to kids in schools, but he didn't think about all these low-income students that don't have connection or computers at home, or don't even know how to get their homework done on a computer. And I said, wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
Yeah.
And she started to talk to me about it. And over the 5 days that I was there, I spent a lot of time with Julie getting to know her. Long story short, I'm like, well, where are you getting your computers from? Because I'm thinking, hey, it's a sale, it's an opportunity.
Yeah.
Well, she had been getting them from Groupon because her brother owned Groupon. So that little billionaire. The reality is we were one of the suppliers of those computers. So indirectly, we were a pretty big supplier.
Wow.
I came home from that conference. I'm having dinner with my two daughters and my wife, my youngest daughter. I'm telling her the story. And she's like, well, Dad, what are you doing to help the kids? So coming from a philanthropic family, but a family that whenever we actually give our time, we give our clothing or food, we want to hand it to the people that need it. I want my kids to experience really helping out firsthand.
Sure.
So my daughter said, well, you're not really helping out if you're not helping out firsthand. So we looked for a charity to get involved with to start helping kids with their homework, things like that. What we found, there wasn't really any charity out there. So we decided, hey, why not start our own charity? So we started our own 501c3, focused on helping low-income kids that were caught up in the digital divide, got them technology and connection for their home, and hired a STEAM coordinator and had teenage volunteers helping these kids get homework done 20 Tuesdays during the school year.
Wow.
That's hence why it was called Tech Tuesday. We started to grow the program across the country, and the goal was in 2020, when my daughter was a senior in high school, was to really ramp up the business. Because we viewed this as an opportunity to teach kids not only how to do their homework, but also some really good life skills. Unfortunately, COVID hit.
Yeah.
And with that, we had to re-engineer our program. We came up with a big, hairy, audacious goal. As a company, Planet ROI, we said, why don't we get 1 million devices into low-income children's hands across the United States? Because there's 20 million kids not learning right now.
Yeah.
With that, we became a member because we met this gentleman, Baron Witherspoon, who happens to be the head of race relations for Procter & Gamble. And since they were one of our accounts, we both realized he has an organization, which is the largest organization on race relations, called takeonrace.org, which there's I think over 40 major corporations now part of. And they had a goal to get 1 million connected devices to brown and black kids. So we had a very, focused goal on both sides, almost identical. We brought that together. This year, the Baum family and Planet ROI are going to donate hopefully over 10,000 computers, which is equivalent to over $2 million.
Wow.
And Take on Race has already delivered over 50,000 units. So
wow.
The goal of being a social enterprise really came out of that meeting with Julie in 2015. So we are a business, right, that's out to make a profit and do good at the same time.
Wow.
And since we made that decision, our business grew from $15 million to last year we did a little under 90 million.
Yeah. Wow. Holy wow. Look at that. Well, kudos to you. And that's really awesome that you're engaged in that. And that is cool. So is there a separate tab on your website for anybody to go to if they want to, or is there any way for?
Yeah, you can see Digital Dreams Project right there. You can,
Yep.
So Jeff, if I were to go into your closets, your garage, your attic, I would find probably between 1 and as many as 10 devices that you've retired, right? But the only reason that you haven't donated them or sold them is because they have data on those devices. We're experts at removing data and providing a certificate of data destruction. So for your listeners that are out there, we can do that for you. You can either donate your devices and you can go right to the digitaldreamsproject.com website, or if you have a large organization or a small organization, you want to sell them, we'll buy them. And the majority of those devices end up in the right hands.
Yeah. So I have 12, by the way, Paul. Yeah, just to let you know. So yeah, my closet has 12.
So now you know where to go.
Yeah, exactly.
And you'll get a data destruction certificate. So therefore, you don't have to worry about any personal information getting out there.
Yeah, the shipping costs I'm going to have to take a look at. Yeah, but you're right. I mean, we just sit them there. They're there. I've got fax machines. I've got laptops. The whole bit. So very cool. So Digital Dreams Project. So your daughter, now getting ready to graduate, Cammie is one of the founders along with you. Is that correct, of Digital Dreams?
Yeah, absolutely.
So Digital Dreams is Digital Dreams and Tech Tuesday. Do they go hand in glove?
It kind of merged because, Tech Tuesday is a physical program, and the next time we're going to be able to get that off the ground is probably not until 2022. So right now the focus is, how do we get, computing and connection into low-income houses, and really help these kids learn. I mean, there's millions of kids in the United States right now not learning.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so if for anybody who's listening to this, wherever they are in the world, and they belong to a company, and companies struggle with this, and they have closets full of old assets that are retired or being unused, how do they just simply go to your website? Is that the best way they can work out?
We actually have a whole process written out right on the website.
Okay.
If you're anywhere in the world, I mean, we're in 87 countries.
Right.
So we have the capabilities to pick them up right from your home. If you have enough assets, like you have 10,
right.
We have all kinds of packaging instructions on how to use, the most commonly, everybody's got tons of boxes at home these days because we're buying stuff off the internet and getting it delivered. So we can use those same boxes, and believe it or not, we can use articles of clothing that you may or may not need anymore to donate as well, and that could be the cushioning to make sure the laptops and the cell phones and the devices of real value stay intact.
Okay. And very important for corporations to hear this today, if you're listening, that there is a certificate of data destruction so that you can rest assured that this data, these hard drives, the bus information and, fax machines and so forth isn't kicking around. I don't know. Do you do fax machines too or not?
Well, those are going to get recycled.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Fax machines went out with,
Yeah. Yeah. But
went out a long time ago.
I remember that bus thing, though. They say, oh, yeah, the information's in the bus. I'm like, God, I got this yellow bus in my pack. But hey, listen, I grew up, when I first started working in sales, it was telex. And they used to, I had bank, I worked downtown in Manhattan, and I had, the Long-Term Credit Bank of Tokyo. I remember showing me how telex works, and, I'm in there and they're explaining it to me. And that was a wild concept. It's long gone now, but, basically, you were paying for characters, which is interesting. So it was kind of fun. What do you see as your biggest challenge when you started Planet ROI? Just take us back. What was your biggest challenge as an entrepreneur? Because I want to try to speak to the entrepreneurial side of your spirit and let other people who are contemplating opening companies or they're chin rubbing this opening of companies. What was what was your biggest challenge when you started this?
Yeah, so it's still my biggest challenge, and the only thing that ever keeps me up at night are people. I think the biggest misnomer when you're the boss, and you know this because you've been the boss, is that you don't care. My biggest challenge is I need to protect all the people, all my teammates at Planet ROI. And sometimes, you get challenged with, how do you help train somebody out of a bad habit? How do you help them build more capacity? We say, do they get it? Do they want it? Do they have capacity? When you're growing like we are at a 65-degree angle in hyper growth mode, how do you get people, to work smarter and not necessarily longer hours and harder? So that's the number one challenge that we have, and especially being a global company, is making sure that different cultures. I'll just take, for example, we have an office in Ecuador. My Ecuadorian teammates, it's not corporate culture there to speak up and tell the boss that you don't like what he or she or they are saying, right? Where in America, and especially at Planet ROI, because we're a great places to work company, we expect you to tell us in a professional way what we could be doing better, to be able to make it an environment that they can thrive in.
Yeah.
So that's my biggest challenge, right? Is making sure that there's a constructive conversation between my senior managers, their people, myself, and the senior managers, and then the whole company. Because in order to grow, you can have the best systems in the world, but it takes people to make it work.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you would agree that people are your most important asset?
100%.
Yeah.
I couldn't put more emphasis on it, especially now. Employers took advantage of COVID-19 and let people go, and shame on them. I mean, we didn't let a single solitary employee go. If anybody was let go from our organization, it was only because of performance issues. It wasn't because of COVID-19. Now, I understand if you had a restaurant, where you were in the travel industry, certain industries were really hurt. But there was a lot of, what I would consider to be bad behavior by companies. If anything, most of my teammates had more opportunity during COVID.
Yeah.
But look, it's it's an opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And listen, sometimes problems and issues and situations are opportunities in disguise. And I look at it that way quite a bit. So what, if you look at what drives you to get out of bed today in the business world, how has that changed over the last 10 years? I mean, what drives you to get out of bed and go to work, and how has that changed?
That's such a great question, because I would say 10 years ago, it was to make money, and it was to provide for my family. and it was to, be prideful, in my position and where I was, my friends. It completely changed when, we realized that so many thousands of lives and now millions of lives have been touched by the technology that we refurbish and resell to them as affordable technology. It completely changed for me when I started to meet some of the people that are benefiting from our affordable technology.
Yeah.
It meant so much more. And if I really think back, Jeff, that's when the business started to really thrive and take off.
Wow. When you had that connectivity to that.
Well, the difference was we found our mission.
Yeah, right.
Like everybody comes up with a mission,
Right.
like they think it's their mission. We live our mission and we live our fundamentals, right?
Yeah.
So when we got to that level of, connecting with who our customer is and connecting our suppliers, these very large corporations that, just think of their old computing equipment as garbage.
Yeah.
It's showing them how they can impact lives. We show an impact map, how they're impacting lives. It's great.
Yeah.
You just feel more fulfilled.
Oh, I bet that map is pretty cool to see. So, that is awesome. Now, how has Planet ROI changed you? I mean, have you adopted a different value system as a person because of what you've seen and been part of?
100%.
Okay.
I mean, I have, every year had to increase my values and also decrease my control, which is very hard to do when you're running a business. So I've had to learn how to let go of the vine in certain areas of our business. And sometimes I've fallen to the bottom and it hurts. Other times, other people have picked up where I've left off. So I would say that the biggest change that I've made is I've become more of a teacher versus a teller.
Yeah.
And I'm really learning that, you're a much better boss when you're teaching.
Yeah. Yeah, very cool. Very great answer. I really like that. And that is, that really connects differently too with the people that you're working with and the people that you do business with every day, because you're doing life with these people too. And, I get it. And that's awesome.
I tell my employees that are really my teammates, I say the word employee only because that's what people refer to them in the world. To me, it's a dirty word. They're my teammates, right? I tell them, you become the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Yeah.
So I surround myself and spend time with only people that are going to better me. I believe that.
Yeah. No, listen, very, very great answers, Paul. And I just going back to the technical side, and we'll hone in on some fun stuff at the end here. But on the technical side, when you take some retired assets and you repurpose them, and then they go back out to fit that digital divide, and you've now put it in the hands of young people who never had technology before, what's the average life expectancy of that asset now in its redeployed state? Is it 3, 5, 7 years?
Yes. So we put an 18-month warranty on all of our products. Most used product comes with like a bumper warranty or 30 or 90 days. We actually put 6 months longer than if you were to buy brand new technology.
Okay.
Plus, we put an 800 number on there because we want you, as the user of that technology, to feel comfortable that you can call us without it costing you any money.
Yeah.
And we encourage that.
Yeah.
I believe, most technology could last 10 plus years if used correctly, right? And I say used meaning, if it's a laptop, you don't drop it, but parts are going to break,
Sure.
Hard drives break, fans break. I mean, we were in the repair business. That's, one of our first businesses.
Sure.
Some components are meant to break over a period of time because they want to build built-in obsolescence.
Correct.
But for the most part, the average usable life now for a Windows unit is about 10, 12 years.
Wow. How about that? That
Yeah.
is so cool. Yeah, you really do see some of the, it just seems like
Yeah, most people get rid of their computers
Yeah.
because they slow down. What they don't realize is it's like they've clogged up the arteries. They just need to get water flowing, right?
Yeah.
In this case, they need to, believe it or not, back up their data and do a complete new reinstall of the hard drive, and then it's back up and running.
Yeah, you're 100% right. I've learned that as a small entrepreneur myself, that's what, a great way to put it, clogged arteries. I like it. I like the imagery. So is there any question I forgot to ask you that you think you can think of?
Any question you forgot to ask me? What's my favorite rock and roll tune?
Well, I'm getting there, dude. We don't miss that question. We don't miss that question, but from a business point of view, no. So,
yeah, I don't think you've forgotten to ask me anything, but what I'd like to just say, and I know I doted on you in the beginning, I'm going to do it again, to any of the listeners that are out there, it's important to not be afraid to ask people to be your mentor. What life has taught me is that sometimes you get lucky and you get a mentor like Jeff Mason early on in your career. That's just pure luck, right? But you need to go seek out mentors. I've done that most of my life, and I was very fortunate, to play college athletics where you get, really great coaching.
Sure.
But I would seek that out, and then make learning personal and business. So we have a saying at Planet ROI, personal growth leads to professional growth.
Yep.
So, listening to this podcast, learning from different people, putting yourself into a situation where you can pick up nuggets. I listen to books all the time, things like that. That's the only thing I would say to your listeners that has really helped me as a business owner, and I think as a father and a husband.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, it's funny. When I look at my career, very, very, very little of anything that I've ever done has been invented by yours truly. It's always been third-party information that I learned or read, and these influencers acted as a mentor to me informationally. And, it's through the try it, apply it, fry it process that, you really say, hey, listen, this sounds good. Let me try it. If it works, I'll apply it. If not, I'm going to fry this and go on to the next thing. And you just, and that's really what we're all about here. And one of the things that's really changed on my end, Paul, over the years is in 1989, I set the goal of writing a book. You weren't with the company then, but I remember telling a group of people at CSR I was going to write a book. And what I started doing was taking situational observation snapshots from that point on. And I looked at situations that I would encounter. Not only did I read about them, but looked at them and what could I get out of them? What was good? What was bad? What could be changed? And a lot of things I saw, something that happened in 1992 happened 4 more times in 93, 7 times in 94. And I kept realizing, wow, there's so many things that over and over and over just consistently keep happening. And what I ended up on was saying, hey, I want to try to do a circular motion of tasks and business conduct around the epicenter of a business. And I want to look at how we as business owners can simplify it. Because what I've really come to realize in my 35 years is the art of the pleasure you get out of doing business is really found in the simple. It's not the complicated up in the treetop stuff. It's the simple stuff. And the biggest changes are when you go down to the dirt and you fix the root in the dirt. It's not up in the treetops, and it's the simple stuff that makes the biggest impact. So we've tried to craft a book and a podcast that looks at things, and like one of our challenges last year, I think if there were 3 things that, if somebody said, what are the 3 things that you could do to help make you successful tomorrow? I'd say respond to all inquiries, follow up, but the Achilles heel, no question, 35 years later, is follow through. People don't follow through. They don't do what they say they're going to do. And it's negatively contagious. It's an epidemic. And, that's what we're about today. So, I mean, and I appreciate you saying about the mentors, because really, third-party influencers, and I hope that my book and my podcast can give little tidbits of information to people just to make 1% changes. And you know what? You make 10 of those, you got 10% change. That's the way I look at it. So, I'm excited to be here in this capacity because, I really, just like you're helping people, I want to pay what I've learned forward to the younger generations and let them, hey, take a tool out of this crusty old guy's tool belt and see if it works for you. But, I want to share. I just don't want to go out, and go out with the sunset and not leave something. You know what I mean?
I couldn't agree with you more. Well, look, 30 years later, you had a massive impact on myself. I'm paying that forward to my kids. I'm paying it forward to my teammates. I know that people like Jeff Snyder and Beth Syracuse, and I haven't talked to Seth Lewis in many years, and Tony Coutinho, all these people that I worked with that went through the Jeff Mason sales training, all benefited from you, all talk about you. So, and by the way, audience, Jeff's not paying me to say this. I reached out to him. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, and again, one of the small treasures in life, Paul, we don't actually know who we impact. It's a thank you is a very underutilized, attribute today in business. We don't thank customers enough for their orders, for their business. We don't thank people enough for holding the door open, for doing this, doing that. It's one of those things I've noticed. I'm sure you have too.
It's easier to cancel than it is to thank.
Absolutely.
So I think what you said, it's easier to go negative than it is to go positive. So, I believe, right, that if you surround yourself with positive people and positive influences, create some mentorship where you're teaching and mentorship where you're getting taught, it's hard to be negative.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Great. So I sent you a couple books. I don't know if you had a chance to read any of it. I know you're a book listener.
I listen to everything. Yeah. So I started off by telling you I'm dyslexic.
Yeah.
So maybe you can read them to me.
Yeah. Well,
are they on Audible?
It's on the docket. We're doing it this year, so I'm doing it with the studio.
If you have them on Audible, that would be great. Yep. Because I'm very. Yep. I'm a challenged reader.
Yeah. So we're going to do it, and we've actually planned it, and it's something in the pipeline. So yeah,
you'll increase your readership dramatically.
Yeah, no, I definitely appreciate that input. So yeah, well, feel free to pass them on to anybody you have there if you want. And we. First of all, just before we go into the last question, which is the rock and roll question, what if you could just give out your social media URLs, or how can people get a hold of you guys on different social media?
So we're on Facebook at Planet ROI, and that's PLANITROI. You can go to PlanetROI.com. We're on LinkedIn. We're on all the socials, through our organization. If you want, to get in touch with me through LinkedIn, it's my name, Paul Baum, CEO of Planet ROI, and I respond to, almost every inquiry I get on LinkedIn that's positive and focused on helping.
Yeah. Okay, great. Are you guys on IG as well? Are you on Instagram or not?
We are, I believe, I don't know. Okay. I'd have to ask Steve.
Okay. Your website's well laid out. So folks, if you just go to PlanITROI, That's PLANITROI.com. You can
plan IT return on investment.
Yeah. So you can get in touch with all that stuff. Well, great, Paul. Just such a cool interview. I'm so glad to reconnect with you this way, and thank you so much for making my day, my week on February. In February, sending me that email. That really was. I really put a beat in my step that day. So we end every show. I don't even know if you knew I was like, you probably like, oh, this guy's training us in this tie, this jacket, this suit. I'm a rock and roller, dude. I love like psychedelic, the 60s, the British invasion, San Francisco, the whole gamut. But I love, I'm a really hard rock guy. I love it. So I asked, as I do everybody, hey, what's your favorite rock and roll tune that, meant something to you? Might not be a hit, number one hit or whatever, but what means something to you? And you gave me a great answer. Let the audience know what you answered with.
So AC/DC, Thunderstruck. And the reason for that is whenever the DOD, the U.S. military, is going in to rescue its own, it plays through the loudspeakers of its helicopters, AC/DC, Thunderstruck, so the soldiers know that they're coming to be saved. So for me, right, that's my theme song, because I consider myself a gladiator and a warrior. And if I'm going to lead, I need to lead from the front, and that's my song. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, and I don't, I didn't know you had this DoD connectivity, but I've been in the tactical industry. So my daytime job, this is my side hustle. My daytime job is I own a sales agency and I represent about 8 different companies, and they are basically tactical and, law enforcement, basically tactical entities that I represent. So bags, different belt systems and so forth. So I've been in boots and all that. So yeah, we are definitely, love you telling that story about Thunderstruck, folks. That's from the Razor's Edge album, 1990, AC/DC. They actually, I researched the song a little bit. They actually got the name from a game or a toy that those guys loved in the 60s. It was called Thunder Streak. And basically what it was a pontoon plane, a little balsam wood pontoon plane that you worked with a rubber band. I don't know, but I remember it. From 67, it came out with the 6th finger. I don't know if anybody ever remembers the 6th finger. It was like a James Bond thing. You could actually put a 6th finger on your hand. But crazy.
I didn't know the story about how AC/DC came up with the name, but I know from the military perspective, how that song is used. And
very cool. Very cool. I appreciate you letting everybody know that. And anybody in the military listening today, any of the branches, thank you so much for your service. We appreciate it. And we appreciate this country, love this country. And Paul, it has been a supreme pleasure to have you on, folks. Paul Baum, PlanetROI.com. And always remember, respond, follow up, and follow through. And man, you can't help but be successful if you just do those 3 things. Paul, thank you so much. Say congratulations to your daughter. She comes up on graduation. And my friend, thank you.
2 daughters graduating.
2 of them graduating.
One's got a sales job. Hopefully she gets a Jeff Mason for a sales leader.
Well, you know what? I appreciate that. And thank you for all the kind words. I really do. That is very meaningful to hear, and 30 years later. So thank you. And hey, man, have a great year. Congratulations on ultra success. And thank you for helping, bridge that digital divide, man. Appreciate that.
Thanks, you.
All right. Take care, Paul. See you later.
All
Thanks.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.